what happens to Africa now in your sense? And the new scramble for its resources, China, Europe, America. I mean, there's lots of new partnerships being struck and new concessions being granted. I think you've mentioned the fact that France had to yield and ends its military presence in Niger for Cobalt and for other. There's a new scramble again, right, for Africa's resources. But I want to talk about it from the African standpoint for a second. Africa has in many ways missed out on many of the great games that I've spoken about, right? It's been on the receiving end of the great colonization, great industrialization game, great capitalism game. One can argue even what I call the great tech game. Is your sense that that's going to likely continue, where it just remains a source of these resources, metals and otherwise? Or is there a chance, or are there signs you're seeing that African nations, or at least a few African nations, could leverage their strengths in a world that's fractured geopolitically now to somehow move up the value chain and not remain just a continent which is seeing just its resources being extracted primarily?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a genuine possibility, not least because I think that we can already see that African countries are not just going to bend over to either the state interests or the corporate interests of outside powers, whether that be Chinese, Europeans, like Americans, and that there's a very strong awareness, I think, in many African countries now of what's actually at stake in relation to this new geopolitical competition in which that they're being fought over. And if you go back to those series of coups in West Africa, so in the Francophone Africa that happened over the last few years, and the one in Niger obviously being particularly significant, you can see that there. I think there wasn't a really explicit agenda around we're booting the French out where uranium's concerned, given that 25% of the uranium in France was coming from Niger. Having said that, you look what Macron's been doing since that coup. He's been to parts of the world, not least Kazakhstan, looking for deals on uranium because he understands that actually you can't just take that for granted any longer. Now, it doesn't, you'll say, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game like that. The energy nationalism or the resource nationalism doesn't just have to be, okay, we'll have state control and we'll just try and do it all ourselves and use it as a geopolitical weapon. It can be more creative than that. And in the sense of as you say, of leveraging what the resources that they do have for a stake in the higher value-added part of the chain.
In the bigger game.
That's the possibility for it to be economically transformative for some African countries.